Today marks the 4-year anniversary of the UK formally leaving the European Union. It was on the 31st of January 2020 when Boris Johnson, remember him, declared he'd finally got Brexit done, hailing it as an astonishing moment of hope.
So let's fast forward 4 years to today, and some issues remain as divisive as ever, including the control of our borders, our economic interests, the Northern Ireland Protocol and freedom of movement in Europe. Well, joining us to discuss this is the leader of the True and Fair Party, Gina, who says there are no tangible benefits to Brexit. She thinks its failure is down to Boris Johnson's irresponsibility. Meanwhile, the founder of Conservative Home, Tim Montgomerie, says it's too early to give a verdict on Brexit's success, but overall, Britain's performed better than other European economies. Welcome to you both. So, Gina, did we make a big mistake 4 years ago?
We did, because the deal was so awful that that Boris Johnson struck. I mean, there were so many holes in it, because we didn't, for example, do the returns policy. He didn't do anything like that. That's why we have the small boats issue, growing. You've got the idea we haven't signed up to REACH, so we have pharmaceutical shortages now, and with the EU stockpiling some 200 drugs, that's only going to get worse. Today, we've got the new border checks coming in, which means a huge amount of paperwork that will come in now, and then physical checks in April and October. So, to businesses that are already on their knees, who are suffering because of what's happening around the world geopolitically, because of the cost of living, because of cost of energy. So, you've also got, for example, data that came out yesterday that says we've got more businesses going bust in the UK since the 1960s. The medium to long-term outlook is not great. You cannot find any evidence. I know Tim's going to say there is, but there isn't any professional evidence that shows that we're better off out than we would have been in.
Go on then, Tim. What evidence is there that Brexit has been in any way a good idea?
I don't think there has always been honesty from either side. I think the Remain side see everything as bad, and sometimes on my own side, the Brexit side, won't concede there have been, bad consequences as well as welcome consequences.
Name a welcome consequence.
Sorry?
Name a welcome consequence.
Well, there was, for example, during the pandemic, we were able to choose much more ably the vaccine. We had much more freedom to implement the vaccine policy faster than other European countries. We've escaped the debt increase that is taking place across the European continent as part of the movement towards post-pandemic policies. It's a very mixed picture. And of course, it's hard to... Gina's just been talking about, the very high rate of bankruptcies in Britain at the moment. Well, that's also to do with the pandemic. It's to do with the slowdown in China. If you look at the European economy at the moment, the protests in France from agricultural interests, you look at the rise of the extreme AfD in Germany. The fact is, Europe isn't a happy continent, and I think that's going to get worse. Unfortunately, we have escaped those consequences, and we can plough a different course in the years ahead.
So things are slightly less worse. Is that the best we've got to say for this?
I just want to pick up some of those points. So the vaccine fiction is not true, because actually what happened is that other countries waited another 2 weeks to see what the full data was, especially on the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the idea that we did it better and sooner because we were outside the EU is actually not true. And there are a lot of court cases coming up because those AstraZeneca vaccines have side effects that we didn't know about. So there are real issues about the vaccine that we rolled out before other countries did, before the full data was available. When it comes to the idea of what's happening to our economy, we actually are the only G7 country that hasn't recovered to its pre-pandemic levels.
I thought Germany was in recession.
No. So Germany at the moment is suffering because it's got such a big manufacturing base. We are not as bad because we have an 80% service industry. But in the long term, this is not going to help us because inward investment is down. Our economy is suffering. Our farmers are suffering. And you cannot underestimate also the fact that the trade deals that were supposed to materialize are not happening. So you can separate. After 4 years, the fictions have been tested to destruction in that you can separate now after 4 years. You can separate the damage that was done by COVID and the damage that's done by Brexit. And if you look at the institutes and the different studies, it shows that longer term, there'll be about a 2 or 3% impact of Brexit that can be separated from the cost of the pandemic.
Tim, is there a challenge that what we actually voted for was an idea and it's been sorting out the execution of Brexit that's been potentially quite bumpy?
Look, we were in the European Union for 40 years, and 4 years on from leaving, we're still really in the foothills of forging a new relationship. And perhaps it may appear that I'm being evasive, but probably we won't really be able to have a proper understanding of whether we have benefited or not from leaving the European Union for quite a few years yet. And that will be about the choices we make, whether to regulate new infant industries like biotech differently, for example, from the European Union, and the choices that European Union makes. If you look and compare the European Union to America, for example, as advanced economies, Europe is growing much, much more slowly. And that's largely because of its policies on energy and regulation. Britain has an opportunity to chart a different course, be a little bit more American in our energy, etc. policies, and we could grow faster. But those are choices we haven't yet made. And if we don't make them, we won't grow any faster. But the great thing about Brexit is that we have the ability to choose now in a way that we didn't when we were members of the European Union.
And Gina, we may scupper ourselves further if we don't buy into Brexit.
Well, the thing is, they had to have had a plan. And I can tell you, having been in many green rooms and many debates leading up to the referendum, that every time I asked a Brexiteer, so what happens when you win? The answer I got back was, oh, don't worry, we're not going to win. There was no plan and no understanding about the details of how our country worked after 48 years of membership.
But there's a choice now, isn't there? We can complain there wasn't a plan or act with the situation we've inherited for the better.
What we're seeing now is that the government is looking at the small print and they're realising that actually they need to roll over a lot of the regulations, that the trade deals they thought they could get with Canada, with the US, are not going to happen, especially if Mr. Trump wins again in later this year. It's going to be really difficult to get a trade deal. And actually, the deals we're signed up to, like the CPTPP deal, has got 0.08%. It's going to add to our economy. That's the government's own figures. So, what we've done is we at True and Fair Party, we've just done a poll looking at Gen Z. And, they are the generation that are going to replace us back at the
And they'll inherit the consequences of Brexit, whether good and bad. Gina, we just have to leave it there for time. Tim, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And we'll look at your views on this very thorny topic on the programme.